All right, councillors, we'll declare the meeting of the Strategy and Policy Committee of the 26th of July, 2022 open. Welcome, everybody. This is the last Strategy and Policy meeting of this triennium. What is it? 26, oh, sorry, I did.
That's my fault.
And my fault for reading.
Off to a flying start.
September. All right, we just lost a few months. You know, it's been busy, okay? All right, so welcome everyone to the Strategy and Policy Committee meeting of the 26th of September, 2022.
6th of September.
6th of September. All right.
Third time a charm.
Just, here we go. Let me just get a little caffeine going.
Or just
All right, I don't know. Okay. Settling in now. All right. Welcome, everyone, to Strategy and Policy, and I'm leaving it at that. Okay. This is the last meeting. Thank you, everyone who's joined us in the chambers. We do have 2 decision papers before us. Those are items 5 and 6. We also do have, for the first time, a PX for this committee, which we'll do at the end of the meeting. We'll cover all the other things in open. Before we go to that, the intention is that we will take a break after item 6, just for 10 or 15 minutes, and then crack on until we are through. So we'll go to apologies. So we've got apologies from Councillor Strange and Councillor Hodge. We've got apologies from Councillor Husband for lateness, and apologies from Chair Barry and Councillor Remington for early departure. Any other apologies that people would like to register? Not. Do I have a mover for the apologies? Councillor Remington, and a second, Councillor Nicol. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried? Confirmation of the agenda. Do I have confirmation of the agenda?
I pleasure doing that. And may I just say, Councillor, that I'd like to say how you've been an outstanding chair. I think you actually, the way that you do it in such an impartial way, non-flustered, I think you're the find actually of this council. I mean that. You are an exceptional chair. You listen to the different viewpoints without kind of fear and favour. And I want to say, on behalf of many of us, we really appreciate the leadership you've shown in this committee. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Russ. Yeah, without fluster until I try and get the date right on the last meeting, and then she's all gone. All right, so I've got a mover for the agenda and Russ. I have a seconder in Councillor White. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Disclosures of interest. Any new disclosures of interest that have not been added to the register already, or disclosures of interest for any agenda items? Nope. All right. Fantastic. Okay. We're going to start out with item 4, which is the Waikato progress indicators. And normally we've done this, because this is not a decision paper, normally we've done this further on into our agenda earlier in the triennium, but I wanted to give it its due. There's a whole lot of work and information and research that goes into these indicators, and I wanted to make sure that that the committee had the time and our energy when we're first full of our caffeine to really engage with the valuable information that comes out of this ongoing process. So, did you want to add anything before I pass over to Leanne?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess I do thank the Chair for putting this up the front of the agenda. Commonly, as the Chair has said, we leave it till the end and we have 5 minutes to scoot through, and yet people are really wanting to drill into it and ask a bit more information. So I guess the Waikato Progress Indicators is a piece of work that is a great longitudinal piece of work that provides some richness of data. There are no value-based judgments in the data that Bayet will be presenting to you. It is the data, but there are some really useful insights, both regionally, what has happened to our indicators, and also where we are positioned nationally. Bayet has summarised those in the executive summary, but we have a short presentation to really highlight the key issues for you. And Bayet, you'll let us know how many years you have been doing this work, and councillors may wish to query Bayet on are there any significant changes he's seen over that time. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Great, over to you.
Tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you, Madam Chair and Tracy. Yeah, it's a privilege to open the last meeting of the Triennium and having some time right up front. I guess the downside is maybe too many questions, but yeah, we'll see how we go. So what I'd like to do in the next sort of maybe 20 minutes is to take you through a little bit of the background. What are the Waikato Progress Indicators, or for short, WPI? Some of the results, obviously, which is most interesting part of it. And then what are we doing with it, and where do we go next? And is that good?
Yep, great.
Thank you. So, yeah, I guess on questions of Tracy about the history of it, it was that the Waikato Progress Indicators had a long history with predecessors that we called MARCO, which was a joint project with all the TAs that came about when the community outcomes were first introduced as part of the LGA way back in 2008, around then. So we had a long sort of consultation process across the region with all agencies, with all TAs, and looked at what matters most to those communities. We had a lot of feedback. It was 18 months a process that everyone took part, and we produced annual results as well, annual reports by TA. But then, as you know, the community outcomes were abolished as part of the LGA, and obviously it was not interested anymore to some of the TAs to be part. But our council, the regional council, decided this is a good initiative to continue, at least at the regional scale. And there was a desire as part of our strategy and strategic directions to obviously have an understanding to go beyond GDP. And yeah, that follows an international sort of movement at the time. So in 2013, we started the WPI process. Again, we selected the indicators based on the community outcomes process. So at the time, we asked the community and stakeholders not only what matters most, but also how do they measure success of those outcomes they want to achieve. And so, yeah, this is a little bit of the history about why we selected those 32 indicators and where they come from. So first slide, as I said, is sort of taking the pulse of the region. It's like a health check. It's a high-level assessment. It's not a detailed analysis, but it is a foundation for more detailed analysis. So it's like a medical checkup where you go every year. If there is an issue, you need to have more testing and more checkups and more analysis, and that's exactly the same here. So this is at the higher level. We look at 32 critical indicators that look at economic, social, and environmental aspects at their current conditions, but also trends back to the time when we started the collation of data and where data is available, which is usually around sort of 27. So it's about 15 years back. It's important to note that these are not performance measures for our council, but they look at our purpose statement, our vision strategy, obviously, and help to evaluate progress along our purpose of vibrant communities, strong economy, and healthy environment. Next slide. Just to mention that all the products that I'm talking about today are available on the website, and they are accessible there, and people can look up and spend further time. One of the products is for each of the 32 indicators is a report card, we call it. So it's a 1-2-pager that summarizes what this indicator is all about. What does it mean? How it is going to be measured? Why it is important? And summarizes the results, current, but also recent and trends as we have available. It also highlights the data sources, availability of those data, and links to additional information. So that's drilling down into more information that people are interested in. Shown here is one example, educational attainment. So again, all these report cards are available on the website. Next slide, please. Another product of the WPI is what we call the scorecard. This is a summary of trends looking at over the longer term. So it's 10 to 15 years back, and say, are we getting better or worse as a region overall? And yeah, if you look at the analysis this year, we have about 12 of the indicators of the 32 that are improving. We have about 11, I think, that are deteriorating or have a worsening trend. And the rest of them, we have no significant trend or change over that time. If we look at some of maybe the positive ones, certain building activity has increased over that time quite a bit. We have improved the regional GDP and income. We also have improved in terms of our role and functions, air quality, significantly from 15 years ago. And we have increased air quality and also some of the coastal ecosystem services values. But there are also obviously a mix of negative and positive trends. And on the negative, we have less community engagement. That goes back to your questions, asking people, how do you feel engaged with your local council in terms of influencing decision making? Again, this is your local council. It's more district councils rather than a measure about the regional council. But this follows a national trend, even international trend. There is more, I guess, apathy in terms of engaging, and people feel more disengaged. We also have a reduction in public transport, and that has been aggravated in recent years through mainly COVID, but also other factors. We seem to be less physically active than we used to be 10, 15 years ago, and we produce more waste that goes to landfill. We also use more water, and we have looked at this as a negative trend, even if it's within lockable allocation principles and according to the regional plan. But obviously, the more water is used, the more stress is put on those waterways. So the trend certainly goes towards negative. Next slide. Last year at the meeting, you expressed an interest. It's good to look at all the long-term trends, but really what's important is in the shorter term. How are we doing in the last 3-4 years? So this is what we call well-being circles, and it's in your agenda paper. It's a bit difficult to see on the slide here. There's a lot of information, but those diagrams capture a lot of information in one diagram. So on the left-hand side is the long-term trend. On the right-hand side, shorter term. The circle is the baseline. So longer term, it's 2007. Shorter term, it's 2017. If we look at those spokes outside the green, it is a positive trend over that time period. So in many ways, well, exactly the left-hand side is basically the scorecard presented in a different way. But in addition, the information these circles of well-being portray is that we can assess the size of the change, not just positive or negative in an arrow, green or red, but actually the length of the spoke is relative to the size of the change. So, for example, road safety, the green arrow at the bottom of the diagram, it has quite a large change. We improved road safety, and again, something that council is its roles and functions. So that's certainly a positive. And that trend is also reflected in the shorter term and continues over the last few years. Generally, you can see that the patterns are quite similar, whether it's longer term or shorter term. So those trends are not changing dramatically. Also, in some instances, they have. For example, crime. it displayed quite an improvement over the time, over the longer term. But then in recent years, we find it's deteriorated again. And so it's like a bit of a hump and coming back. Similar with educational attainment, we observed an increase, and over the longer term, it's still green. It's a positive trend over the 15 years. But if we look at the last few years, we go back. So there are differences in those trends, and it's worthwhile to have a good look. By the way, all the raw data that we used for this year's analysis are in your agenda paper as well on page 16, 17. So if you want to have a good look at the data, that's where you can find them. Next slide, please. The next product I'd like to talk about is another circle of well-being. This time it's comparing the Waikato region with New Zealand Inc. So how are we better or worse in terms of the indicators that are both available at national as well as regional level? So you can see not all of the indicators are available regionally or nationally in both. But there are obviously significant differences. Also, for a lot of the indicators, we hover around the circle, which represents average New Zealand conditions. So outside, green, the Waikato does better. Inside, red, we do worse. If you look at what the Waikato does better, certainly in terms of Te Reo Māori speakers, we have a dominant and far above national average, which goes back partly to the proportion of Māori in our region as well. We, despite having a reduced trend of physical activity, we are still more physically active than average New Zealanders. So, it's not all bad. But those are the things that we need to look at short-term changes. Can we afford to go towards sort of the average New Zealand trend or not? Community pride, we certainly do better on a lot of those social indicators, even community engagement, like I said before, which is deteriorating over recent years. But overall, we still do better again than national average. So again, not all bad. We are slightly happier. Life satisfaction is above average, and again, building activity is above national average. Where do we do worse? Even with all these improvements in road safety, we still look worse compared to the national average if we compare the data. Similar in crime, we are worse off than nationally. Recycling, we don't seem to be that active. And the economic indicators of regional GDP and income, while improving again over recent times, they are still below national average and always have been. Not a lot, but there is room for improvement there. Next slide, please. So one important factor, like I mentioned at the beginning, is this is a bird's eye view of the region. But the really important thing is to analyze and get into the details, drilling those into the details. So if you look at the pyramid there, the WPI, those 32 indicators are right at the top. They summarize a lot of information in complex information in one figure sometimes. And we are having secondary indicators that support those 32 indicators and a lot more data underneath that we need to drill down to. I think what's really important in terms of statistical data, and this relates to the RMA process as well in terms of spatial planning, we really need to have more location-specific data so that we can look at differences across the region and also across different groups, population groups across the region, whether it's ethnicity, whether it's gender, age, different needs. So one of the projects that feeds into WPI is the quality of life survey that we do in conjunction with Hamilton City. So they do the city and share the data with us. We do the rest of the region, and we do that by TA and also collate data by age groups, gender, ethnicity, and other factors. So this provides a good sort of indication about where things are at the local level and with different groups of society. Some of these results are included in the WPI, like the one that I highlighted there. Are you proud in your local, in your town or local area? How do you feel, looks and feels of your local area? And just 64% across the region are saying, yes, very proud or proud. And yeah, I think that's a good, and again, it's above average nationally. But if we look at the different TAs, there's quite a difference. Hamilton City, both West and East Wards are at the lower level, about 52, 54%. If we look at Taupo, 76% of people are proud in their sort of town and local area in the Taupo district. And Waipa district is at the top with 78%. And that's quite consistently over the 3, 4, 5 surveys we have done now over the years. And yeah, it will be interesting again to drill further down and maybe interrogate those people and see what is it that makes those local areas and districts feeling proud about their area. Also in terms of age group, maybe not surprisingly, younger age groups are less proud about their local area. They're more sort of, I guess, iterant and move from one place to another, less attached than we old folk are. So they, on average, for those under 25 years, they look at sort of 60% or even less, 56% in terms of compared to 64 on average. Whereas over 65 years, they were more likely to agree that they're proud, like 73%. So that's just an example of how drilling down can help in our analysis and be quite different in terms of how we look at those results. Quite often, if we look at only one indicator that summarizes all the information, it can mask underlying trends. And so we have to be quite often careful to just take one figure and say this is it without having good understanding. Next slide, please. And I think this is the last slide. So what's next? I think one of the key messages that I want to give is that the WPI is not a program of work in itself. It shares a lot of the data with the community, with other organizations, but also internally, and feeds into various other work programs. So we contribute and make multiple use of the same data, which is important not only in terms of cost effectiveness, but also in terms of robustness and consistency of the data used and information. So I think this is really important. And I think, again, Council is congratulated to persist with that sort of consistent collation of data over the years and providing that sort of longer-term record of good, robust data. So we continue, obviously, to share and promote the WPI data and hope that people take them up, do further analysis, drilling down into the details, depending on their sort of roles and functions, and we benefit from that work. We would like to have additional data and information, and one of the gaps is, like I said, the local data, drilling down into the not only districts, but neighborhoods, and understanding the spatial context of information to prepare our evidence base for a good regional spatial plan. Te ao Māori frameworks, Tupuranga Māori, is always a deficiency and difficult information to get. And there's national initiatives. There's some good regional initiative. There is recent work being done around the Three Waters consents in the Waikato. For example, looking at the Matariki framework in Cambridge. So looking at Matariki as a framework to collate information relevant in a Te ao Māori framework. The importance of that is that, as you know, it is more than Te ao Māori, is more than just grouping information into social, environmental, and economic. It's a holistic approach. And in terms of our role, it is important to realize that the environment is obviously the foundation, the basis. People are part of the environment, whereas quite often we have sort of removed and we explore the environment and exploit it rather than being with it and investing back into the natural capital and to the environment. So those frameworks are really quite important. We also work with Treasury. They have decided not to amalgamate Te ao Māori frameworks with other frameworks, but have a separate framework to use. So yeah, that was based on the Maori leadership group, that they don't want to mix it with sort of the existing Pākehā frameworks. Another point, I think it's really important to take the data further and provide insights along the value chain. And yeah, I think there is more resources required to enable that. And we work with the Waikato Wellbeing Project and others to add that value to look at our data and yeah, so what does it mean, and provide insights, because yeah, I guess data not being used is useless in that sense. So yeah, we got to work along that value chain from data, information, knowledge, and then insights to really make a change of people's behavior. Yeah, I mentioned we are working with central government. Treasury is important because, as you may know, the Public Finance Act requires Treasury to produce a well-being report every 4 years. The first one will come out in November. So that's in addition to the well-being budget that is in process every year. But this is an additional requirement of the Public Finance Act. And we are one of the few countries that look at sort of well-being reporting as a legal requirement. So that will be interesting, and we work with them to try to obviously align the WPI work with that sort of national initiatives. I think I'll leave it at that in terms of happy to take any questions, and the next update will be around this time next year, and yeah, we'll hope to see many of you again.
Thank you for that. Really appreciate it. We'll start with Councillor Nicol.
Thank you, Chair Pamela. Kia ora, Beat. Thank you again from me as well for putting this at the front of the agenda. I totally get where you're coming from there, because I really love this stuff. But the trouble is, it's not quite where I want it to be yet, and I think that's understandable. I think we should focus on it a lot more. And break it down to tell those stories, like we said last time, but also to the district level, so that, and perhaps even in another forum, to just the council meeting or the strategy and policy meeting, because the meeting's very formal, and I think there's a whole lot of depth of information there that councillors can really get to know the issues of their district that they've come from, so that they know what to focus on. So I would actually put forward that rather than waiting a whole year, it would be a really interesting piece of an interesting topic to delve deep in with the new councillors and the new trainees to understand their issues and know what the colleagues in district council are talking about when they say crime is up or anything like that. Because when you agglomerate them all like this, there's some really weird stuff that comes out, especially over the long term. So I saw that housing affordability is a neutral squiggle when we all know that it's not. But that must be an accumulation thing, and you're welcome to correct me though. And in a future paper, when it's presented, I would also just suggest, from my point of view, the wheel is really good for the short-term change because that gives it very punchy. But for the long term, I'd really appreciate seeing a time series graph with trends of various angles, because the angle tells me something rather than just the distance from the centre. And I would also look at grouping it by the well-being, since we're working on the well-beings, because I've picked up something really interesting there around the last 3 years. There was that slide, and the things that were trending down in the last 3 years were actually all very social, cultural related ones. There were things like community engagement, pride, crime, cultural respect, physical activity, which impacts mental health. And then the other ones were some environmental ones, which obviously doesn't surprise me as well. Yeah, so we all see around us, whether it's in our communities or in the media or even in politics, that social cohesion is currently not like it once was. And it's pretty critical that we turn that around, because it's really hard to get stuff done when we're not getting along. So that's my feedback at this point in time. Really, yeah, keen if I got anything of that wrong or or if you
Through you,
agree or disagree.
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair, if I can just add something before Bat may like to add. We also do we've got the quality of life data. We've also just completed the Your Environment What Matters survey. So I think if we can take an action into, I'm just thinking new council laws induction, I think it would be really useful to build up those kind of local profiles. So we've got the region, but also those local profiles where, as Bayet says, we have all this data, but it's dead data if we don't do anything with it. So I'll have a conversation with Marley, and I think there's something in there using those three pieces, and Bayet will also inform me if there's other material we can source to build up those TA profiles for the incoming council, because I think that would be really useful.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah, just to add, we get all the deprivation data as well. Again, that's really important in terms of the spread across districts, but also even within districts. Yeah, within Hamilton City, there is a marked difference, obviously, between deprivation, different factors. Yeah, TA data is a priority, and yeah, I think it would be nice to have those sort of district profiles. Some of the districts do that in some way or other. There is no consistency, and obviously something to consider for us would be to work with them rather than come up with our profiles. This is the regional council telling the TAs this is what we know. So there is a bit of work to be done there. In terms of the long-term trends and line graphs, I'm working currently on establishing a dashboard of the WPI where we have those trends as a line graph rather than sort of those different sort of blobs across. So that will improve things quite a bit. In terms of the housing indicator, briefly, I remember last year we had a good discussion. And housing affordability is something that people look from different angles. We have different secondary indicators. What our indicators is about is not when you want to buy a house, how affordable it is. And that's core logic and real estate. That's where they focus on in terms of how many incomes you need to buy your house. And in Hamilton, Waikato, that's about 8 times now. Auckland a bit more and coming down now. But our indicator focuses on how affordable it is to maintain and live in your house. So it looks at all the housing expenditure from rates, insurance, everything that you need, mortgage payments, obviously, in relation to your income. And so that's quite different. And obviously it goes down quite a bit, like now mortgage rates up. And so, those changes. But overall, we look at, people spend about 20% of their income in the Waikato on housing in terms of living in a house. And that's less than the national average. And it's considered affordable on average. Again, it's a matter of drilling down. We know that about 17% of Waikato residents spend more than 40% of their income on housing. And the sort of national standard and OECD standard is about not more than 30% on that indicators. So again, there are different sort of indicators to look at if you look at an issue like housing affordability. And it's important to distinguish the differences.
No, thank you. And I'd also just flag, depending on what format the Waikato plan is in, obviously if the work's being done for this council, it would be really good to share with that group in time. Thank you.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thanks for bringing that to the council. It actually makes sad reading in many ways. And I say it for this reason that, and I repeat that $3.6 billion a year comes from dairying alone into this region. And if we can't get this right, our well-being to a better level than what we have over the last 20 years, we've got the leaders are actually losing touch. And I think that the leadership is weak. And just as an example, I look at Hamilton City when I was mayor, introduced the curbside recycling. I mean, that was 20 years ago. They've still got those bloody bins. Every other town in this country has the large bins that are collected even for Tupuranga. Where's the leadership? It's the same with the mayoral forum. Where's the leadership? The mayor say, look at Huntly. What a disgrace that town is with roller doors. Compare that to Huntly, where there is leadership and where you see a vibrant vibrant town, same economic, but look at the absolute presentation. One is a disgrace. It can be done with good leadership. And I like Jennifer's idea, and Tracy, at the beginning, rather than just telling us the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff a year later, let's divide it into cells. What we can do, let's try, even if we knock some of these kind of areas where we're absolutely behind the game. And I think, you know, we've had a good thrash around with housing. I think we're such a poor kind of trust between central government and local government. And that is certainly not helped here with the centralisation, whether it be the politic or whether it be the hospital boards or whether it's about to be the kind of the water. I am concerned to see transport's down 23%. Why have we got a drop in patronage of 23%? I'm not blaming you, but got any idea? I can see why during the COVID, of course.
Well, again, it's we build roads, so obviously if you have enough roads, then people use the car more likely than otherwise, and we have enough parking in the city and in areas. So if we reduce the parking, then people probably use more transport. You got to look at overseas what happened to make them change to public transport. Yeah, obviously the cost is something, but yeah, we have reduced that now. But yeah, these are sort of the longer term trends, still looking at public transport fairly expensive relative to other cities around the world.
Yeah, well, at least the kind of the rugby's going well and the stadium's going well. And last but not least, the Tahuia is going 150. The councillor sitting here right opposite me, she went on radio and said there's 10 per trip. I mean, it's absolute nonsense. So at least the Tahuia is going well, weekends particularly. So there is a little bit of light in the end of the tunnel. Main thing is not the train coming the other way with the light on. But I don't think it is. Look, we're a wealthy area. We should be able to lift the pride of this region at a faster rate than what is actually happening at the present time. And I think a new council, because half of you won't be here, I can assure you of that. Let's hope a new council can get their head around it, get a mayoral forum that actually is positive, and see if we can get some pride back in the Waikato. Thank you.
Councillor Kneeburn.
Thanks, Chair. Really good stuff as usual. Do you think it's time, and maybe you do this, I don't know, to kind of formalise some sort of survey process to understand who's using this stuff and how we're using it, particularly as we're trying to refine it as well? Because I think I heard you say, obviously we give it to central government for the work they do, and we hope it's well used, etc. But what do we know about how well this information is used?
Yeah, it's a good question in terms of we haven't done a targeted survey in terms of who is using the data, what are the clicks on the website, for example, and who, and what on the website. So with the new dashboard that will come up in next month or so, we will start that sort of Google Analytics to see, at least from the website. Otherwise, we have just a record where we share data with central government, Stats New Zealand, Treasury, MSD, and MFE, and obviously locally with the Waikato Plan and the Waikato Wellbeing Project, with community funders like Momentum and Trust Waikato, that we work quite closely with Momentum on their what they call vital sign work. Again, we try to be complementary rather than repeating what they do. So, but it would be useful to have a more structured analysis and process in place to see the use of the WPI.
I mean, it kind of feels to me like it's a mayoral forum or some other similar forum conversation would be quite good, because it seems to me that when TAs are setting their strategy for the next 3 years, that they should be leaning on this, and maybe some of them are, but I suspect some of them probably aren't as well, and we should use some of that feedback, thinking about some of the suggested refinements that Jen mentioned before, to make sure we're going down a path where we know the information is going to be used as well,
Good.
Thank you. Thank you for this work, really impressive. Such a comprehensive data set. And I really like your graphics. In spite of Jennifer's sort of slight caveat there, I think they're brilliant. I suppose in terms of getting this message out, we will be doing some sort of media release. Yeah, great. And can we have a PDF of this? Yep, great.
Yep.
So a couple of questions. To what extent now can we drill down to the territorial authority level, and where do we access that information?
So we have quite a comprehensive database, and part of that database is all the data that are available at TA level. We document, not necessarily collate all the data, but we know which ones we can get at the TA level. So that's the starting point. And yeah, like I said, previously we had those data and we reported on them to all the districts, and they were part of a regional Marco forum, which is monitoring and reporting on community outcomes, Marco. So yeah, we could go there again. Again, I think it would be like maybe, Councillor Kneebone said, we should promote WPI and see whether the TAs and other users are interested in, and then proactively share, rather than at the moment it's sort of, most people know about it, but I don't go out and promote every day as I could, because just a lack of time. But I think that would be useful.
But as of today, to what extent could we access that at a TA level?
It wouldn't be too difficult. It's just a matter of analyzing the data, checking, and quality control.
Right.
And then
for myself as a member of the public, how would I do that?
Oh, as a member of the public, it's quite difficult because it's not sort of one source. So you need to go across, probably a lot of different websites to mine the data together.
So that's where Tracy's idea is coming. That's something for the future to.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Solgum, what used to be Solgum Taituara, the National Professional Managers of Local Government Association, they started a process on a subscription basis to provide TA-based data. In our region, maybe 5 of the TAs have subscribed. I guess our argument is it should be available free rather than on a subscription basis.
Sure.
So we would certainly work towards a model of available not just to TAs, but overall to the public communities. That's the other thing, that the Solgum work Taituara is only available to the TAs as such on a limited basis.
Right. Thank you. So my final question relates to air quality. Is that measure confined to airshed and sort of fires, or does that include pollution from transport?
It includes airsheds overall. It divides it up by PM. What we have in the WPI is PM10. We're moving to PM25 soon, and that's OECD and likely national environmental standards will go there, which we will have a bit of an issue because we have some monitoring equipment now looking at P2.5.
So the measure is airshed only, not transport emissions. Is that, am I understanding you right?
It captures air. Yeah.
The reason I asked the question is that there's a study just come out in July of this year relating to, it's called Health and Air Pollution in New Zealand. And it breaks down sort of the effect in terms of human health and on the economy between airshed pollution from fires and so on, and maybe industrial processes, and that which comes out of the tailpipe of a car. And that report is saying that from transport pollution from nitrogen dioxide is causing 2,200 premature deaths in New Zealand each year. So I think if we're measuring air quality and maybe patting ourselves on the back and saying it's improved, what I'd like to know is whether that metric is improving or declining as a separate thing. So just going forward, whether, in future surveys, whether we could break it down between those two measures.
Yeah. So we do the greenhouse gas inventory that looks at different sources.
No, I'm not talking about greenhouse gas. I'm talking about nitrous oxide that causes human health problems.
Yeah, so nitrous oxide is part of the greenhouse gases and part of the inventory and by source.
No, this is nitrogen dioxide.
Yeah,
I'm talking about not
right. Okay.
not a greenhouse gas. Yeah. So so in terms of not only the number of deaths, there's figures here for Waikato. Cost attributable to Waikato in 2016 was assessed to be $746 million, equivalent to $1,600 per person in the Waikato. So that's a really serious sort of health impact that I suggest we need to measure separately going forward.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Just a couple of comments, I think. Usefully, there is some information already in the technical reports part of our website around Your Environment, What Matters, the update that Bayet did a couple of years ago on the Social Deprivation Index. Now, over the last, I think, 5 or 6 years, when we've been capturing data, we make sure that the data can be shown at the territorial authority level. Unfortunately, it is still in a bit of a patchwork of sitting in this technical report and that technical report. So as Bayet said, you do have to extrapolate it out yourself. But those documents from, I guess, member of the public perspective are sitting on our website at the moment, but they're buried in technical reports. We've also just completed a draft economic profile. We're just going through the final throes of reviewing that document. Again, we're using the dashboards approach so we can put all of that information up on the website. Again, it's by territorial authority as well as by the region. And just with respect to the transport emissions, we've actually, this is just as an aside, but we've actually just led a contract for the next 3 years for monitoring those emissions throughout the region. Jonathan Cordwell's leading that piece of work. So it's one of those pieces of work that we know we've had to concentrate on. We managed to secure additional funding in the annual plan, so we're expanding our network in that regard.
That's great. Tracy, is there any chance you could circulate to us sort of a guide as to how we might access that information?
Sure, yeah,
Yeah,
because it is a bit of a challenge, and that's part of the work that Bayet's been thinking of and trying to coerce people over a period of time to get something more accessible to all.
Councillor White.
Yeah, thank you, Bayet. It's always good to look at these reports and see how we're doing. I just want to agree with what some other people have said. I do agree there is some quite sad reading here. I do think that all of the things to do with social cohesion are particularly important because together all of those statistics actually indicate something quite serious, I think. And the thing is that when you have problems with community pride, people feeling disengaged and not being able to influence things, lack of social connectedness, it actually has a flow-on effect in terms of what people are willing to do in their community, in terms of environmental things, and also, you know, just I think in terms of mental health and basically what you end up having to spend, it's a significant thing. So I think it's a priority for us, and I do think it's important to dig down at that territorial level as well, just to actually see, because it interested me, for instance, you saying that, you know, in Topol there's quite a lot more pride than there is in some other areas, and we really need to understand what are the things that make the difference. And I do agree that we need to do that at the beginning of the term to decide what needs to be prioritised. But I would just like to highlight a few things. One of them is that since I've been here, so that's 9 years, this whole thing about the Waikato and crashes, so fatalities and serious crashes, we've been the worst in the country, I think, since I've been here. And I can't see any improvement in it. And I really think we need to stress it at the beginning of the next term. What is it that other regions are doing that are making a difference? Because if some are doing better than us, why are they doing better than us? Also, I just had written down here that things like the other thing that I would like to see in the report over time, like just within the Environmental Performance Committee, we talked about the fact that this PCE report that's come out identifying that New Zealand doesn't even have a register like other OECD countries of the quantities of contaminants that end up in our environment, and they've identified a major, some major issues in terms of what we measure. They're recommending changes to do with that, and so I think we need to make sure that when those things start to be measured, that they come through to us through this kind of report, because I think we need to know whether, whether the Waikato, where we are in terms of the rest of the country, as well as whether the whole country is doing poorly at it. And that was the other thing I did want to say, that I am interested in seeing how the Waikato is doing in relation to the rest of the country. But one thing that really strikes me is that if nationally we're poor at something and we're just a little bit better at it, we shouldn't take a lot of comfort in that. We should be looking at it as, well, actually, we're poor at this. We should be looking at it as a statistic, not thinking, oh, well, we're a little bit better than somewhere else, but we should actually be thinking, well, actually, those statistics are really poor across the whole country, and we should be making that a priority. So just not getting caught up too much in the, well, we're a bit better on this, and we're not so good on this, but looking at it more, just well, how good are we? How good are we at these things, and what needs to be prioritised? There were a few other things as well, but I don't think I really need to say them. I think I've said the most important thing. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Kathy.
Quick
A
one.
quick additional one there,
Quick
Jen?
additional one. There were 2 points. One was, I'm going to make a prediction that I think the social cohesion thing will continue to deteriorate. I think that's a natural consequence of the environmental degradation that we've worked up towards over decades and decades. So whether that be a pandemic or the high cost of living, with a feeling of scarcity, with more resources being in, more demand but less availability, that kind of thing. So any action, as part of the 4 well-beings, any action any one of us can take or the council can take to lift social cohesion, really worthwhile, I believe, to help with that as much as possible. My second point was, I just don't want anyone to think that Hamilton is backwards. About 18 months ago, they had wheelie bins rolled out and even composting bins. So you can see them every week if you drive around. So I just wanted to put that out. Yeah.
Well said.
Thank you for that, Councillor McPherson.
But as I leave the council, one of the highlights has been your work. I really appreciate it. This is another, and thank you, Chair, for having this up front. This is an outstanding piece of work, and I really appreciate you putting in front of us. Kathy, I think you're right. We should not be just saying, how do we go vis-a-vis our natives, the other TAs. We should be saying, in absolute terms, these aren't good enough. I think there's some alarming insights in here. There's 4 or 5 points I want to make. The first is to Jen's point on the graphics. Tracy, yesterday you made the comment about a unidimensional set of data, and I thought that was an outstanding comment, and I think I'd apply that to this. We can get a far more visual impact from these stories by use of graphics. It's a shame that we couldn't use a log scale because it sort of feels like that would be needed, but that's not going to do it. So graphics I agree with. And this is going to be another example of the weakness of this council not having a marketing team. My view is that this is going to go to a comms team and they're going to there'll be a news release. This is a classic example of where a marketing team would commence a story, and it would be a story over time. I just think there's such value, both good news and some work-ons and some troubling things for us in here. I've been with this election campaign going out of my way to find out what's happening in the minds of the people less than 30 years old. And it's stunning how reluctant the ones I'm talking to are about going to vote. It's really quite frightening. So I'm predicting yet another poor voter turnout. But I think if we were able to market to those people some of the stories in here, we might find a way of engaging them. If you look at Europe at the moment, what's the one message that's coming out of Europe on every news release at the moment? That is energy price inflation. In that situation, it's because Russia's turned the gas off. I predicted in New Zealand we will see energy price inflation, probably for the reasons that Jen's outlined around degradation of the environment and the social impacts of that. So I think what it would be useful is if we could have some sort of measure of, for want of a better term, distributed generation. In other words, there will be a metric that the gentailers are collecting on the amount of generation off the grid, solar power by households, by territorial authorities, because it'll lead us to unpack the story around energy prices. It'll help unpack the story around infrastructure for energy distribution in this country, which is going to be challenged. I mean, already in a place like Te Awamutu, 4 Teslas down one street will collapse their power fuses and transformers in that street. You know, so I think some sort of metric around our ability to generate power that doesn't rely on 50-year-old hydro dams on the Waikato River would be useful. But I've saved the best till last. The thing that really scares me in this set of data is income inequality. Because to Kathy's point, history tells us what happens when that metric is not brought back into line. Just go and ask Marie Antoinette how it ended for her. I think we should be really concerned about the income inequality metric here because it started at 0.3. I'm assuming this is an index of some sort.
Yeah.
So it started at 0.36. It peaked in 2015 at 0.45, and it's now 0.371 compared to 2001, 0.36 versus 0.371. To your point, nothing in there to celebrate. And it's a shame Councillor Rimington's not here to listen to his colleagues, because what he might find is that there is an attempt at leadership. I never thought I'd say it, but I do think he's hit the nail on the head when it comes to regional GDP. Because I looked at this data set and I said it started at 42 point, and I'm assuming these are real numbers, inflation adjusted, not dollar of the day. So it started at 42.8k, we're at 59k, that's a growth of 40%. And I'm asking myself from 2001 to 2022 in real dollar terms, what does that feel like? And I think he's right. I think for the breadbasket of New Zealand, nothing in that number to celebrate. And you could say, well, so what? Well, the so what is, you know, if we continue to frighten the farming community with pernicious regulatory creep as they are at the moment, oh shit, Sherlock, GDP is going to be affected. Wow. It's, you know, that's why I really like this stuff, because the stories in here help us with some facts that we can, you laid it out, data, information, knowledge, and insights. And it's the insights that are so valuable around this table. So that will be my comment, is a tinge of sadness around the metrics to do with income, etc., because I think that's going to lead to frightening social indicators. And I would like to see an attempt for the Climate Action Committee. The Climate Action Committee, in my opinion, should be insisting on this council measuring the attempts by each and every one of us to generate our own sort of power and help the grid. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you for that. All right, I thank you all the councillors who have contributed to that conversation. I think that there's some real important things for us to take into the next triennium, particularly Councillor Nicol, your suggestion around this being a key part of the induction process. alongside the other data sources that we have, so that the new council has a real clear picture of where their starting point is, and that feeds effectively into the direction that council sets for itself. Also, the comment about proactively encouraging TAs to engage with this data so that the region as a whole is able to harness the information and set localized targets more effectively for overall regional good. So I think that's certainly something to take forward. And also just in terms of the marketing or the comms associated with this. It is such good data, but it's important that when we put it out, that we put it out in a way that the layperson understands how to interpret these. Because I think if you put this out and saw, as you mentioned, Councillor Nicol, the status quo or same old for housing affordability, or that crime. That there was an improvement in the experience of crime in the region, I think that people would look at that and say, hang on a second, that's absolutely opposite to what I am hearing. And the unfortunate thing is I take your point about that there's a lot that feeds into that, but for a lot of people who will engage with that communication, they'll take it at face value, and then you lose some of the impact of this because they'll start to question it. If we don't go into some of that detail that says, yes, we recognize that these are the messages that people are hearing. This is how this data needs to be interpreted, right? So that would be a point that I'd make in that. Any last comments you'd like to? No, thank you very much for your presentation. Thank you for your hard work in continuing to collate this information and present it to this council over the triennium. It's very valuable, and cheers for that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for all your feedback. It's been really good. And the PDF of those are available from the website, and we put a link in to provide those links.
Great. Thanks, Pat. All right. Now on to item 5. Sorry. Oh, right. Oh, I'm just, you'd think, is it, I don't know, is it July still? I think it is. All right, we have a mover in Councillor McPherson. Do I have a secondary in Chair Barry? All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. All right, now we can move on to item 5. And this is page 18. This is the approach for amending the Waikato Regional Policy Statement to give effect to the national planning. Would you like to?
Madam Chair, this is, I guess the best way I can describe it from my perspective, a piece of government required administrivia that we must comply with. Let's hope no ministers online. But this is a piece of work that Bruce's team has been asked to do from a statutory perspective to align our regional policy statement with national planning standards. I think importantly, councillors, it is not changing the intent or direction of anything in the regional policy statement. It is moving bits and pieces around. Now, as simple as that may sound, moving bits and pieces around, we have to make sure that nothing is dropped, nothing is omitted, or we haven't changed the intent. So Bruce's team has been working on this for some months because we have needed to go through almost the entirety of our RPS. We could just move it, but I would just like Bruce to give a quick overview so you are fully conversant with what you're moving.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Thank you. I did have some slides, but
I get it.
that's all right.
That's all right. Thank you.
And just want to note, you've seen this first slide before, but the one thing I did change on this was that in January this year, the government changed the timeframe by which to give effect to the national planning standards. Originally it was 2022, but they moved it out to May 2024. And everything else on that first slide is historical information, which I provided in my report to you in June last year. And the second slide was the council resolution from that time. And just moving to the third slide, please. Just really the changes that have been made, as Tracy has just so well said, that it's just changes the format and structure to give effect to the National Policy Statement. The Te Uri Whaimana, the vision and strategy, remains in a central position, even though that's not specifically provided for in any way in the National Planning Standards. We've made some consequential amendments to improve the text, to correct some spelling mistakes and misquotes that we've found. We've put all these in a table outlining the changes in the provision numbering, and got a table there of the minor consequential amendments that we've made, and an e-plan version will go up on our website together, and we'll put out a public notice saying that we've done this work, and that will include a table of the changes that we've made, changes in numbering to the various provisions. But just reiterating, none of the wording of the provisions has been changed. The content has not been changed in any way whatsoever. So it's all there.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you for that, Bruce. Councillor Nicol.
Quick question was just in paragraph 37 that said we will inform iwi and TAs. I was just wanting to check. Does it mean more like reiterate to them that it's happening? Do they already know that we're
They already know it's happening.
Okay.
I presented
I
at the
thought
JMCs
so.
on it, and we're just now informing them this is what we've done.
That it is done.
Yeah, that it is
Awesome.
done. Yeah.
Thank you. That was my only question. Just in case that.
Yeah, no, we've got some letters prepared to go out at the end of the month, and it finally goes through council. Yeah.
I just know people don't like surprise. I
Yeah.
know it's not me.
Councillor Wyatt.
Yeah, just one question, and that was to do with where you had the 2 new chapters for tangata whenua and mana whenua and cross-boundary matters would need a Schedule 1 process.
Yep.
Can you just sort of give us a bit more information about what that is?
So we're going to link that either to the when the highly productive land National Policy Statement comes in, we'll need to make changes in response to that. So we'll connect one of those chapters to that, and possibly also to the freshwater work that we're doing. So we're scheduling those in, they're scheduled in.
Okay.
So they're changes that we have to take through a full first schedule process, and which wasn't appropriate to do by way of this process, which is just really making consequential amendments.
Okay, thank you.
All right, no other questions. We have Councillor Pearson for receiving the reports, noting the mandatory amendments, approving the minor text corrections, and public notification. Do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Kneebone. Those in favor? Opposed? Carried.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Cool.
I do note that there's been a bit of, more than a bit of work that's gone into that, so thank you for your efforts.
Cool. Thanks very much.
All right. Now, on to item 6. This is on page 48. This is the submission to the Ministry for the Environment discussion document managing our wetlands in the coastal marine area. This is
It is, yeah, Madam Chair, this is the third in the series of amendments that Ministry for the Environment have called for comment on. We have previously provided comment on 2 of those. This is the last initiative that we understand Ministry for the Environment to be calling for submissions on at the moment. Councillors, I think you have met JP before, João Paulo there sitting up the front. We also have Katrina Andrews, who is a new policy advisor who has started with us in Miffy and Lizette's team, and we have Alejandro sitting up there as the team leader. We also have in support on this topic Chris State sitting to the side by Bruce. This is a matter that we've canvassed through Coastal Plan Workshop on the 18th of May, through the May Stratton Poll agenda, through submissions subcommittee, And as I said, this is the last element here today. So, Alejandro, who's going to lead us through this? JP, thank you.
Welcome.
If you, JP, if you can please pull the speaker towards you. Thank you.
Thank you. So thanks for the opportunity for being here today. Kia ora. Hello. All right.
There we go.
Now you can hear me. That's great. So thanks for the opportunity to being here today, Madam Chair. Thanks for the introduction, Tracy. We have prepared a short presentation on the discussion document. Would you like me to go through the presentation or straight to questions?
Go ahead and share the presentation.
Okay. So on the 10th of August, the Minister for the Environment released a discussion paper called Managing Our Wetlands in the Coastal Marine Area. The purpose of the document is to address issues associated with the application of the National Environmental Standard for Freshwater to coastal wetlands. Back in 2020, the government released a freshwater package, which consisted in the National Policy Statement for Freshwater Management, embedding long-term change throughout regional coastal plans. And you also have the National Environmental Standard for Freshwater, the NESF, setting the consenting pathway for activities in and around wetlands. However, many interpreted that the NESF would only apply to inland wetlands and not to the coastal wetlands. And to clarify that, the High Court in November 2021 held that the NESF should also apply to coastal wetlands. This has raised a range of issues by applying the NESF on top of the New Zealand Coastal Policy Statement and on top of regional coastal plans. The key issues raised with the discussion document, next slide please, is that the physical extent of the NESF wetland provisions, it's unclear. The High Court noted that the NESF should not apply to the whole coastal marine area. However, it did not specify in which extent it should apply. Another key issue is that applying the NESF provisions to the CMA would prevent or constrain activities that are unlikely to cause the loss or degradation of coastal wetlands. Just as an example, the Waikato Regional Council has identified 35 permitted activities under the Regional Coastal Plan that would require resource consent under the NESF. The discussion document proposes 3 options. The first option is the status quo, which is letting the NESF apply to coastal wetlands as it is now. Option 1 is to amend the NESF to clarify which rules would apply to natural coastal wetlands and to actually define natural coastal wetlands. Option 2, this is the preferred approach. This is to amend the NESF so that wetlands provisions would only apply to inland wetlands. This would be done by changing the reference to natural wetland to natural inland wetland throughout the NESF. The Minister for the Environment is accepting submissions until the 21st of September. WRC staff has prepared a draft submission. The submission is in support of option 2. And this is in alignment with Council's previous submissions to the exposure draft to the National Policy Statement for Freshwater Management and the National Environmental Standard for Freshwater. This is also in alignment with all 16 regional councils in New Zealand position. We also note that option 2 will ensure that the national regulations do not override the bespoke directions provided by the regional coastal plans that have been developed in consultation with local communities in Tangata Whenua. So we are happy to take questions. Thank you.
Madam Chair, if I could also just acknowledge that Mark Brocklesby is online. So from England, Mark, I don't know what time of the day or night it is over there, but Mark can respond to any actual implementation questions that Council may have, how it would impact on our present coastal plan and its implementation.
I think it's about 1:45 over there. You are actually burning the midnight oil. So very impressive. I'm loving the commitment.
Correct, 11:45.
The second bullet point up there, it's trying to, seems like it's got a couple of double negatives in it. It says applying the NESF and provision MA could prevent or constrain act likely to turn that around. What's the counterfactual? If we apply the wetland provisions CMA, saying it'll prevent us doing some stuff that has no impact on wetlands.
Yes.
But what else does it do?
Mark.
Would you like to?
So
Yep.
in anticipation of the question,
Yeah.
I looked back on our workshop notes from May.
Yeah.
So the counterfactual, I think, is that activities such as beach renourishment, jetties, wharves, sea walls, navigation safety lights, access mooring that's presently permitted by our district plan would be prohibited activities. And our regional plan. So we have activities that have been assessed, that have been through a public process where people have said the impact of these activities, such as, say, moorings or beach renourishment, do not have adverse effects on the environment. Therefore, they've been through the process and have been identified as such. Some of the others, such as, jetties, wharves, seawalls, they may be prohibited activities by virtue of this provision. But Mark, you may be able to explain.
Sorry, Tracy,
Yeah.
if that provision goes ahead, are you saying that some of those things that had been okayed would now no longer be able to be okayed?
They would be prohibited activities for which you could not apply for a consent.
That's interesting.
Mark?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, in addition to that, I think, as Joel pointed out, there are a number of relatively minor activities which the coastal plan currently identifies as permitted activities. So these are things like minor discharges of water from properties. That would include things like stormwater. It might include minor structures like mai-mais, whitebait stands. It would include maintenance and repair of lawful structures, removal of structures. So these are all relatively minor activities which the coastal plan currently identifies as permitted, but which under the proposal, under the NES, unless modified, unless changed, would all require resource consent. So, I guess the issue is that we've been through a public process under the coastal plan, deemed certain things to be relatively benign, not requiring consents, and that would be overridden by the NESF. And of course, right now we're in the middle of a review of the coastal plan. So all of those regulatory settings are in the process of being reviewed in any event. Yeah, so that's basically in a bit of a nutshell. So that 35 of these permitted activity rules would all essentially revert to requiring consent. So that would affect a lot of coastal activities and occupants. Thank you.
Just checking, online we had Councillor Husband had his hand up earlier, oh, is it still up? Okay, Councillor Husband?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I don't have any counterfactuals. What I do have is a statement, completely agree with staff direction and that of the other 16 regional councils that option 2 is the right direction. Thank you.
Thank you, Stu. Councillor Niban.
Thanks. So Mark, when you talk about minor activities and you mentioned discharge of stormwater would require a consent, that would be, for example, stormwater discharge from my spouting on my coastal section, coastal house and things like that?
Correct.
Yeah. Because I think I see Fred's hackles rising a bit, and I just want to make sure that we understand the difference between a minor discharge versus a significant urban discharge from the town of Raglan or something like that.
Yep. So yes, absolutely right. So a lot of these, and that's a good example, a lot of these minor types of activities, there would be no permitted category for those activities because effectively the NESF is a blunt instrument which captures them all.
Yeah. So look, I think I'm on the page of the staff recommendation. I guess the main thing, I guess I'm looking at you a bit here, Tracy, too, is that the process we're going through now will ensure an opportunity to protect those wetlands that the NES Freshwater would have protected, but in a much more targeted and practical way, I guess, for want of a better word. Yeah.
Yes, that is what staff believe.
Oh, yeah. Well, and Jen's just made the question: is are we running a risk here that the protection of those critical wetlands isn't going to get shoved out to the next review of the regional coastal plan?
No, we're identifying those areas of sensitive conservation value within the CMA that we're required to do under the NZCPS as part of this review.
Thank you.
Councillor Clark.
Yeah, the definition of a coastal wetland is mean high water springs out to the 12 nautical mile limit. However, there is, if you look around harbours, estuaries, a majority of that wetland is above mean high water springs. Therefore, these discharges that are occurring like Councillor Kneebone just described has to pass through a natural wetlands before it actually gets into the coastal margin. Therefore would be, in my interpretation, still an illegal activity. Would it not then be, and what is happening? So that's one part of the question. The next bit is, yes, referring to Kawhia, Raglan, coastal towns, where we have existing stormwater systems that are granted consent, that are being hooked into by all of these new subdivisions, where we've had upgrades to outlets without any demand or want to improve water quality. And we're allowing further discharges that are causing degradation to the coastal marine area, coastal wetlands, is still being permitted. So I am completely opposed to the way that this regional council has decided to submit in support of coastal wetlands being excluded from or being treated differently to inland wetlands. To me, it doesn't make sense. It's lazy. It makes, again, allows for further degradation, and it allows for us to be exploiting our natural environment at the expense of future generations because it's easy and it's cheaper. However, the outcome for the future is not what we are wanting at all. So the first part of the question, again, the definition of where a coastal marine area wetland is compared to a freshwater, and does it have to pass through the freshwater part before it gets to the coastal part? And like Stu said, when you look at around the edge of the harbours, around all these estuaries, because of where the boundary is,
how do you get past the freshwater wetland before you get into the saltwater wetland?
Just Chris State, do you have a?
My question confusing? Well, maybe I should re-explain it because Councillor Nebo doesn't understand my question. Okay, so the boundary of the CMA is mean high water springs. Okay, so wetlands don't stop at mean high water springs. There is a certain amount of wetland. If you took a measurement within an estuary, mean high water springs, there's a portion of that wetland which is in the coastal area, but that is also intimately or part of is connected to that is above mean high water springs, which is then the freshwater wetland. So how do you pass water off a section bypassing the freshwater wetland, getting it directly into the coastal wetlands, which then becomes a permitted activity to pass his stormwater off the land? To me, it's impossible unless you're going to pipe through that freshwater wetland, and you're not allowed to do that. So how technically, legally, can you do it? No, the coastal wetland, this is where the confusion lies, where you don't understand that the coastal wetland is mean high water springs out to sea. That's it. So how can it be inland of that, as you're referring to? Can't be.
So I appreciate what you said, Councillor Litchwick, and what some of the conversation is that I've about scientists is you're right, there will be wetlands that are landward of mean high water springs, operate by themselves. There will be wetlands that are seaward of mean high water springs, and then there'll be those that traverse the boundary. So there will be the three.
Can you explain what is
options.
traverse? Yeah, traverse.
Yep.
It is
So
both.
Straddle.
Yeah.
And,
Yep.
yeah, and as far as I can see, unless there is a seawall or a hard structure built on mean high water springs, there is no wetland, above mean high. But generally, if you look at the Whaingaroa Harbour, Kawhia, Aotea, they're very flat. There's only millimetres of tidal, and it's the spring high water that actually keeps those wetlands alive, and where there is the inanga sporting habitat is above mean high water springs. So they're still a very important component of the coastal system, but because we've got a boundary, mean high water springs, that runs through the middle of those wetlands, they are, as you've said, connected. But if you're going to use the letter of the law says that, therefore, above mean high water springs is a freshwater wetland. Therefore, it's part of the freshwater wetlands rules.
Yep. And what you've hit on, and exactly one of the reasons why the regional councils have said just picking up the NES for freshwater and applying it to coastal wetlands is as I think Mark used, a very blunt instrument, because freshwater wetlands work different to coastal wetlands, and freshwater and coastal wetlands work different where there is that intersection of freshwater and the coast. And just saying inland, the provisions related to inland wetlands should be applied equally to coastal wetlands. We're saying that is far too coarse, that the evidence base that has been used for the freshwater wetlands needs to be different when you're taking into account coastal wetlands. So I appreciate what you're asking, but I'm just saying from our perspective, though, that is exactly one of the reasons from a staff perspective that we believe what MFE are trying to do is challenging.
You still haven't answered the question, really, as in What are you going to do above the boundary to those wetlands that are still above mean high water
Water
springs
springs
that
that connected
surround
to-
the harbour?
Yep. Oh, Chris, I'll pass over to you because you know the details.
Yes, well, for the coastal plan, yes, but for wetlands above mean high water springs, the NES freshwater would still apply to them.
And that's what I'm saying. So there's still, harbours are still surrounded by freshwater wetlands, 90% of them. So how are you going to pass through the freshwater rule, get into the coastal rule?
For the discharge, for the minor stormwater discharges that we're addressing in the coastal plan, they have to be discharged directly into the coastal marine area. Usually it's through pipes. A lot of areas up the coast where you don't have a wetland, there's a small pipe that will take their drainage out, over the cliff or over a small bank as a way of getting it away from properties.
Totally unacceptable.
Why?
Because you imagine all the discharges that, because we're cheating what we're trying to protect. All wetlands, and particularly coastal wetlands, are critically important for ecosystems. And this council and 14 others, unfortunately, are saying that we want to continue to be able to exploit, degrade, and use these systems. And I know you've cited moorings and navigation buoys and a few other things which would be affected, but it's all of those other things that Brent Sinclair put in front of us as being affected by this rule. And there was a list of 30, I think, 35. And I looked through all of those, and there was about 30 of them I thought really should need a consent. And part of that consenting process, there should be room to make improvement, not currently just letting it happen, because our coastal systems are continually being degraded because we're treating them this way. So you've got your point, but the question I still really haven't had answered, I'm sorry, Chair, is where we have defined the CMA, and you can't ignore the fact that above the CMA is still a wetland, and then would be a freshwater wetland because it's not a coastal, it's above this. So you're saying then, because in the freshwater standards, you're not allowed to discharge or put a pipe through or any of those things without consent. You've got to stop 100 metres back. So how are you going to get past these, get into the coastal wetland? That's the dilemma,
So I think you've made your point. Can we cross this off?
Yeah,
or?
look, Madam Chair, I think staff have recognised that in recommending the option we're recommending. In paragraph 9 of the report, we say, look, our position is based on the fact that there has been no rationale for the inclusion of coastal wetlands. There is considerable uncertainty regarding how to delineate coastal wetlands. So, we're acknowledging that inland and coastal wetlands are not the same, and they will override bespoke rules. I think it's important from a staff perspective, we are not looking to further exploit or degrade wetlands. We are saying this is the best option we can see at this time, rather than a blunt instrument that hasn't been through a first schedule process, where we have proven that letting some of these activities occur in the areas to date haven't been as impactful as perhaps as impactful from an adverse perspective as perhaps MFE think they might. So
I happen to disagree when I see that heavy metals, all of these contaminants at the outflows of stormwater drains are continuing to build up.
And I think, just to clarify, they would require consent under other provisions of the existing coastal plan and in our draft coastal plan. They would require consent.
They do.
From the discharge perspective, not from the wetland rules that we're talking about here.
Just being an activist, then an environmental activist, and I call an 0800 RUD, the RUD team and say, okay, this guy here is discharging his pipe through a natural wetlands, which is above mean high water springs, and it's ending up in the coast. What are you going to do about it? They're going to go, well,
All right, I think your point has been made.
You've got the points,
I think
yes.
your point's been made. Thank you, Councillor Clark. Okay.
Yes, thanks. I've got sort of two parts to my comments. The first is about the process, not about the merits. Then we'll get on to the merits. So as an introductory comment, I'd say I'm very satisfied with the way that we are involved in submissions generally. I think, we're given a really good opportunity to make contribution to submissions. But in this particular case, I have some sense of unease and disquiet around this particular one. And the reason I say that is because it was well known before the submission was written and presented to the submission subcommittee that we would have this opportunity today where all of us would have a comment. And so that submission subcommittee was asked to comment on land-based wetlands, not coastal wetlands. But the staff chose to include a submission on coastal wetlands when that was neither urgent nor necessary, because we would have this opportunity today. We knew that this opportunity was coming because it was foreshadowed by the ministry. So we now have a scenario where we've effectively locked in a council position through that subcommittee process, and I think we'd look rather silly if we tried to change it today. And I think that's unfortunate, and I'd like to think that we wouldn't repeat that process in the future, because I don't think it was a good process. So that's where I land on that, and I've actually written to the Chief Executive about it. So I just wanted to share my disquiet with the other members today. In terms of the merits, I think there's a comment that has been made that maybe we can't, it's hard to see the environmental benefit from this proposal option from option one. And I suppose my comment around that is, if you look at the state of the Gulf reports and other reports on the state of our estuaries, they are in a state of decline, and this quite severe degradation. So at a high level, if we continue to do what we've always done with coastal plan provisions and the New Zealand Coastal Policy Statement, are we going to end up with the same result? And to me, I think that's quite likely. And I know we're reviewing our coastal plan and it will have more, stringent conditions in it. But I think, if we keep doing what we've always done, we're going to end up with the same result. And so for me, I think we actually do need some higher level national direction, some environmental bottom lines that say this is what, we can't go above. And we've actually, as a council, agreed to that in terms of freshwater and wetlands on land. So then the question is, well, does this current proposal fit the bill? And I'd have to admit it's a bit of a hot mess, right? Because, although the Cabinet right at the start envisaged that these regulations would apply in the coastal marine area, I think on a careful analysis, and that's certainly been done in the papers we've presented, that the actual groundwork hasn't been done to achieve that outcome. So, so I'm left with a scenario where I look at what the actual Ministry for the Environment report states, and I'd just like to read this out. The Ministry has a work program focused on providing better outcomes for estuaries, which is currently in the planning stage. Within this work program, there will be scope to further consider protection of wetlands in the CMA. This is a separate work program and will therefore have its own public consultation process. This development of estuaries policy will also clarify the relationship between the MPS FM and the NZCPS and provide for better integration across freshwater and coastal management. So where I've reluctantly landed with this is I think the current option one is going to be difficult. So what I'd like to see our submission do is to show every encouragement to the government to proceed with that work. Sorry, not quite finished. And also that we support a review of the New Zealand Coastal Policy Statement, because that was last written in 2010, and obviously there've been quite a huge number of developments in policy since then. So yeah, that's my position. I think we, as a council, we should recommend that further work that's been sort of flagged by the ministry, we wholeheartedly support it.
Madam Chair, I note in the introduction to our submission, which is on page 53 of the agenda, paragraph 5, we talk about encouraging further work focused on the management outside the NES, which is much referring to the work that you've just referred to. You don't specifically refer to the New Zealand Coastal Policy Statement, but I think from what I know is coming up through the National Policy Framework and the amendments to the NBA, the Strategic Planning Act, that is one of the things we've asked for as a sector, better integration and a more current NZCPS. So I think we could include reference to that in the submission.
Sure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Which would be in the paragraph 5 on page 53. And I would agree with the summation, Councillor Tegg, it's a mess. Yeah, we would have preferred Ministry for the Environment to do the work to inform what they're wanting to do as opposed to doing the rework, which inevitably is going to come at us, I think.
So given my comments, do you think, apart from the reference to the New Zealand Coastal Policy Statement, we need a statement that we strongly encourage central government to proceed with that work program?
Through you, Madam Chair, I would refer to us, I would think we would highlight that particular sentence that you read out and strongly advocate for that to be prioritised as part of the work program.
Right. Thank you.
So as opposed to within this submission.
No, within the submission, Madam Chair, an amendment to clause 5 on page 53 to recognise that.
All right. Right. So with that, we've got a mover and Councillor Husband and a seconder and Councillor Verco. Oh, sorry. Didn't see you
So
down
yeah,
there.
I'm probably not saying a lot more than what Dennis said, but I just want to check that in that paragraph 5, does that mean we're going to amend it to say that we strongly encourage further work and that we include the sentence that Dennis said? So just checking that, then does that mean that we need to say and that if we are okay, so yeah, okay, so you're going, so noting the amendment, okay, that's all right then, because
Yeah.
I didn't want to vote for it as
Yeah.
it is.
Yeah, no, we're going to,
Okay, thank you.
we're going to add that part to paragraph 5.
Madam Chair, what I would suggest is amend paragraph 5 so that strongly encourage, and this is commonly, you'll let the Chair and myself to frame it up, but to strongly encourage the further work, to refer to the particular sentence from the MFE document, and then also include reference to the need to review the New Zealand Coastal Policy Statement because it is dated. So those are the 3 additional recommendations.
So just because this is the only change, I'd like us to be able to minute the change so that it doesn't, we don't delegate, we're just agreeing that that the submission is endorsed, noting the discussed changes with paragraph 5. How do you want to do it? Just to
so noting
close it off right now.
the increased emphasis that council would like placed on clause 5.
Noting the
Increased.
increase. Sorry, or who's dictating here?
I was, but I know I speak faster than James can type. Yeah, increased emphasis. Madam Chair, would you like to take a cup of tea and perhaps I can write it up, or did you want me to type it, James? So increased
Because we've got our
emphasis.
mover and seconder online, and I'm afraid if we break, I just think I'd lose them. Can we?
Sorry, James. Emphasis, not efficient. Sorry, the pressure of everybody watching. EMP, HA. HASIS. Now we've lost it. Okay. Here we go.
Nice.
Thanks, James.
All right. Plug that in and put it back on the screen. All right, so we've got the motion. So that the committee endorses the proposed submission on the Ministry for the Environment discussion document managing our wetlands in the green area, noting the increased encourage the ministry as stated in their discussion document, strongly encourage the ministry to as a review as to alignment with the MPSFM and the NESF. Yes.
I thought if we got the general intent, we could.
All right, we've got a mover and a seconder, and that's all those in favor? Opposed? You want that division recorded? Councillor Letchwork voting against. Councillor White, yes, I noted that. Councillor White, well, the motion passes. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you to the team who has brought that and presented that to us today and answered all our questions so efficiently. Thank you for that. We are now going to take a wee bit of a break. We're going to do 10 minutes, so we're going to be back here at 11:30. All right. So thanks, everyone.